The subject of children's books and Easter treats, rabbits are fluffy, cuddly, and adorable. Unless they're feasting more on your garden than you are, then they're suddenly wild vermin pests that need to be taken care of. That contradiction, combined with thoughts of this 1980s Cadbury Caramel Bunny commercial, sparked Jasper Fforde's creativity.
Haven't you heard of Cadbury's Caramel?
You know, was this the only job she got? You know, as a rabbit? And I thought, no, she didn't.
You'll have to keep watching to find the unlikely, iconic place she goes. All of this led Forde to a narrative dare, the fantastical place he challenges himself to set a novel.
And when you've got a narrative dare and you can't let yourself off the hook, what it means is you sometimes really have to rummage very, very, very deeply in that authorial toolbox to try and find the tools to enable you to tell this very difficult story. And in that journey is sometimes some really exciting things happen.
It's how he started all 15 of his internationally popular absurdist fiction books. The narrative dare for The Constant Rabbit.
A family of rabbits moved next door to a little village in Middle England, and the villagers want them out.
But these rabbits are human-like with their own language, religion, and way of life. A new world generated by Forde's imagination, detailed all the way down to the way rabbits shake hands with humans.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've got no thumbs, you know, they don't have any thumbs. So, you know, how do you shake hands? So they sort of hold your hand in amongst there too. And this is what I call there are about, 15, 20 tenets by which I write. And the logical progression of an idea is a strong one of them.
Join us as we discuss the alternate reality of his latest novel and its not-so-subtle social message, the influence of film and pop culture on this book and others, and how Forde goes about making the utterly fantastical seem somewhat normal.
Jasper Fforde, thank you so much for joining us.
And hello to everyone in St. Louis. I'm sorry I'm not over there. Usually we nearly always drop off and see everyone in St. Louis for a talk and everything. And the library service there has always been hugely supportive. So I'm sorry I can't be there. But maybe next year or the year after I'll be able to get back. But but thank you.
Are you in your studio in Wales?
Yes, I have. As you can see, I have a little sort of converted barn that I use as a studio. It's usually a photographic studio, but I thought, well, why not put some set dressing in the back and just instead of having it's usually a bookshelf, isn't it, and half a picture.
Right.
But I thought, I'd just sort of make it different.
Well, I wouldn't expect anything less with your experience as a photographer and all your background in the film industry. You used to be a focus puller, is that right, in the film industry?
Yeah, focus puller. Yes. Basically, I had to keep the actors in focus. So I was paid a lot of money to stop Sean Connery looking like a great big pink bath sponge. Essentially, what I had to do. But it's slightly tricky because you can't look through the camera. So you actually have to do it with a tape measure, which I still have just there, with a tape measure, and marks on the floor. So it's quite complex, but it was very challenging, very interesting, challenging job, and a ringside seat at the movies because I was the closest person to the action. The cameraman and the director, they're all staring at a screen, but the focus puller right at the front.
Well, I want to talk to you about you have an obvious love of the big and small screen, and it shows up in your writing. I want to talk about that in a little bit, but you talk about how you take pictures there. I've seen some of your beautiful photography on your Instagram page. I mean, that's in that studio, right?
Yes, the still lives. Yeah, I shoot them in here. And it's quite fun because I can just come down here and I can take a break from writing, and I can come down into the studio and I can go, I think I want to take a picture of an eggplant or something, because they're very nice eggplants because they have a skin which holds water very well. So if you pop an eggplant on a little rig so you can't see anything around it against a black background, and then spray it with water, and all these little droplets remain on it. And I take a picture of it, and that's like 20 minutes of just mucking around, and then I go back to my writing. So it's very relaxing. It just takes you away from the writing to do something else, and then you can come back to it refreshed.
And you use film, you don't use digital, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes use digital. Mostly, I'm film. I think because I spent all my time in the film industry, we used film, and it has a certain sort of texture and smell and the sort of tactileness and the sort of the celluloid, whoop whoop like that. And I've kind of always, I don't know, it's nostalgia, whatever. I just kind of like it, and using that old, large format stuff. I go out and I'll be doing, because I live in Wales, mid Wales, and we've got beautiful streams and mountains and, lovely things like that, and fantastic oak trees and things. And I do like to do a bit of landscape photography. And I go out there and I take the picture and I filter the lens and I do everything I have to do and get the exposure right, and then I process it correct. And if it comes out, absolutely as I wanted it to, then that is actually hugely satisfying, because you've done something that seemingly is quite easy, using skill and experience. And I think there's something in this post-skill world which is kind of lost maybe by that sense of being instantly able to do something, rather than actually learning a skill slowly and then using that skill.
Something else that I love on your Instagram account is this hashtag that you started with the apostrophes, the missing and superfluous apostrophes. I love it.
Yeah, the hashtag catapostrophe. Yeah, so a little portmanteau word there, an apostrophe and a catastrophe, a catapostrophe. Yeah, this is, and as soon as you do this, you realize that I'm not the only one. If you thought you were the only person who were really annoyed by either apostrophes which are missing, or even worse, where they shouldn't be, you are not alone. You are not alone. So I started this hashtag catapostrophe, and whenever I see one, I always sort of take a picture of it and then post it, and everyone goes, "Whoa, that's a good one."
I want to jump in and talk about this new novel of yours, The Constant Rabbits. I'm wondering if you can give a short description of it. Is that possible?
Yeah, this is an elevator pitch from it's my Burj Khalifa elevator pitch, which is obviously a very tall building with a very long elevator. Okay, here goes. So, in 1965, 18 rabbits were anthropomorphized in this unprecedented event. They became 6 foot tall, they could walk, they could talk, they had reason, they had understanding, and everybody was amazed. It's like, whoa, wow, how did that happen? This is incredible, welcome, celebration, let's talk about this, about being a rabbit, how fantastic. But now it's like 55 years later, it's 2022, numbers of rabbits have grown, not dramatically, but they have grown, and all that celebration has turned to suspicion and fear and a little bit of hatred. And now the ruling government in the UK wants to move them, rehome them to a mega warren in Wales, something the rabbits are really not that keen about. My protagonist, Peter Knox, works for the Rabbit Compliance Task Force, which as you might imagine, is not that friendly towards rabbits. And he lives in a little village in the middle of Middle England, and things get complicated when a family of rabbits move in next door to him. The whole village want them out, but this is very complicated because Mrs. Rabbit, Connie, Constance Rabbit, is someone he sort of had a bit of a crush on at university. So it all starts to get a little complicated.
When you describe it, you think, wow, that's really out there. But as you read it, you have a knack in all of your books that you are able to make something that's absurd, like we call it absurdist reality, right? It's absurd, and yet the way that you write and the similes and metaphors that you use and the cultural references, you can see yourself in the book's pages almost. Is that one of your hallmarks, that it has to feel like it's something that you could be a part of?
Yeah, I think writing fantasy books, I set them in the present day, and everything about the world seems very familiar. apart from this sort of one specific thing, and whether it's about, you know, people who can travel into books, or that, you know, humans hibernate, or, you know, they can see different colors, or that you have rabbits, you know, walking amongst you. The rest of the world is kind of real, and it's very, very recognizable and very familiar. And I think that's really important when you're writing sort of whatever it's called, science fantasy or absurdist fiction or whatever, is because then the reader, I think, has something to kind of lock into and say, no, this is a real world. The suspension of disbelief is not kind of up here. It's kind of maybe a bit down here. And I kind of do it, I hope, in a kind of slow way. And these sort of facts about the rabbits are kind of revealed in a sort of, you know, nice, slow way in which the reader is not suddenly lost.
Well, and as you said, you're not very subtle as far as what some of the messages that are in there, because it's in a Brexit world. You know, we're talking about racism, xenophobia. Are you hoping that people kind of take away like, maybe I need to think about these things a little bit?
Well, you know, clearly there are issues in this world that we need to deal with. You know, very big issues, very pressing issues, which definitely need dealing with. And I think it's a broad coalition. You know, a lot of people are going to have to do a lot of work, and some people who have a platform and who have position and the right place and the right time can do a lot, actually. You know, and that's not me, but others, perhaps like me, can do a small amount. And I think that's really important, that this is a broad coalition. And even if you're doing a small amount, you're doing something. And it's very easy to say, well, this is not my problem, or I'm not involved, or I'm nothing to do with it. And I think what I was saying with this book, with Peter Knox, who is kind of our everyman, is that he thinks he's kind of one of the good guys. And there's this term, leporophobia, right, which is a fear of rabbits. And he doesn't see himself as leporophobic in any way, because he's not as bad as the very worst ones. And he keeps on trying to tell himself, well, if I didn't do my job, you know, someone else would. But he's very complicit in this extremely leporophobic society. And it's about him sort of suddenly realizing that he should be doing something perhaps more. So I don't know. I mean, I hope perhaps people read it and think, well, that's quite interesting. When Jasper tells this story about, and these things are happening to rabbits, maybe that will make people realize that, you know, this is stuff that we do to humans as well. But I think that the most I can hope for, perhaps, is to either, you know, open up people's eyes maybe a tiny bit, or cement resolve in people who are already, you know, getting there, but perhaps just think, no, I really need to do something a little bit more. Even if it's like just challenging friends when they say something that's a bit, you know, just so that little amount. So I think that's, I'm under no illusion about, you know, what I'm doing here, or, you know, or the power or anything. But I think that's probably what I'm trying to do.
Right. I mean, my biggest takeaway was that you can have a belief in something, but if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't really mean anything.
And I think that is, you know, the question that everyone, I think, maybe is asking themselves, or I hope to ask themselves, is it's not enough just to know the problem. It's good, obviously, you know, this is a step to understand the problem and talk about the problem. But if all that meaningless chatter does not lead to some sort of action, then it's just meaningless chatter. And I mean, the constant rabbit is slang, you know, in the UK. The constant rabbit, you know, bunny, and the constant rabbit means just chattering away, sort of banally about pretty much nothing. And I hope that the constant rabbit doesn't just become more of the constant rabbit. That maybe, you know, people will take something from it and, you know, and move on, and we can hopefully get some sort of change, you know, happening.
That was one of the things I was going to ask you, is about the title. So rabbit, that's not something that we say here in the US, but someone who's a constant rabbit, it just means that they talk and don't really ever say anything.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. So bunny or rabbit is Cockney rhyming slang for talk, or, you know, chat or anything. And when you say someone, oh, well, it's just constant rabbit, you know, they're just constantly rabbiting on. It just means they're just Yeah, they're just talking endlessly. Bunny, 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 bunny. That's all it is. It's just talk, but there's nothing behind it, you know. And so there's, you know, very much a sort of play on words there, with Constance Rabbit being, you know, the one of the major characters in the book, known as Connie. Constant Rabbit, the chat, and the fact that, you know, Connie, I think, still fancies Peter after many, many years and three marriages of her own. So there's, you know, there's three little plays on words there going on.
You mentioned some of the names of the characters, and I was wondering where the names come from. I mean, so Peter Knox is the main character. Was that a nod to Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit?
Yes, there is an Oxford. There is a kind of spoiler alert. So the Peter, I think I wanted him to have a rabbit name, so that is clearly from Peter Rabbit. Telling you why he chose Knox is probably a little bit of a spoiler alert, but relates to a sort of an ongoing trope of mine, where I have a very, very, very bad pun in plain sight that you don't really realize what's going on until about page 94. So there's a bit of that going on. But Constance Rabbit, I just think it's a great name. Connie. Originally there was a kind of, I was trying to sort of bring in a sort of Lady Chatterley's lover kind of subplot to it. And her husband is actually called Clifford, so they're Clifford and Constance. And that didn't go anywhere, but I kept their names. Although Clifford Rabbit is known as Doc, that's his nickname.
Well, and then there's also these rabbits weren't the only animals that in the event became human-like. There were also some others.
Yeah.
But foxes are one of them, and Mr. Fox with the double F. I wondered if that was kind of like Ford with the double F. In fact, there's another fox in it, Jacaminka Fox. It's spelled. Yep. But I love because you write with two small F's, as if having two F's wasn't pretentious enough. Was that a dig on yourself?
I mean, I have two F's in my name, I believe, just as an affectation, you know, and I think it was maybe 1860 or something. And, you know, the Fords, the FRDEs, you know, went, well, we're different from them and we'll just add another F. And it's me just saying, I've got a, you know, horribly affectatious name, you know, Jasper Fforde. It's, you know, you can't make it up, really. But it is my real name, and I was born with it. And, you know, that's what happens if you have sort of trendy parents in the 60s growing up in North London. You get names like Jasper. So, yeah, and it's just me having a bit of fun at my own expense, really.
Your sense of humor is so much fun. I love the library scenes in this book and some of the things that happen, and it's just so much fun. And your sense of humor, I've read, talking about your parents, kind of harkens back to your childhood. They took you to a lot of Shakespeare plays, but then you were growing up with all this kind of campy television show. Is that right? Is that kind of what the mixture of those two things?
Yeah, so I had a sort of curious upbringing. My parents were kind of very, very sort of cultured people, and they used to take us out to all kinds of, you know, theatre and the ballet, and but at the same time as I had this sort of this diet, so this side, it was also the 70s where we had some very good sitcoms, and I've always loved comedy. And I had a brother, my brother Matthew. He had a very, very sort of bizarre sense of humour, where he put some very, very strange things together, very sort of non sequitur sense of humor, which I really, really, really like. And I think the three things coming together, and also being a bit of a sort of loud third child, where I was trying to make myself heard. And the best way to do that often is through being the clown, you know, and being the clown in the class and everything like that, which is obviously very annoying for teachers. And I think that's kind of where it all came from. And I kind of developed it, you know, through those sort of teenage years, trying to stand out by being sort of funny and silly.
I want to go back to this idea of yours about, you know, the rabbits and you know, this whole, because it's very creative. And I read that this came out of you thinking about what happens to characters after we see them. And this was you thinking about a Cadbury caramel bunny. Is that right?
Yes. During the 80s, this highly sexualized rabbit was used to sell chocolate. And I sort of I remember getting to think, because I'd already been thinking about what in the Yellow Submarine, you know, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. I was wondering, you know, in the Truth and Reconciliation sort of sort of hearings afterwards, in which the Blue Meanies were sort of, came up in front of the panel and had to explain themselves. Whether the other people who were allied to the Blue Meanies were like the Apple Bonkers and the Snapping Turks, and the Glove, that used to fly around, whether they were part of it, whether they were like hangers on, and, whether they're forgiven and what happened to them after that. And that was just that little thought experiment that I was doing. And I kind of like that kind of stuff. And and I was getting to think about this Cadbury's caramel bunny. Was this the only job she got, as a rabbit? And I thought, no, she didn't. I reckon she was originally going to be in Pulp Fiction, Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. And there's this section in it called the Bonnie incident. You see, the Bonnie, you can see where I'm going with this already. Bonnie incident, and that's where this guy gets shot in the head, and they have to clean it all up, and it's the scene with Tarantino in it. And it's a pretty good sequence, I must say. And I thought maybe it was the bunny incident, and in fact, originally this same rabbit that starred in these commercials, Rover's there because Tarantino said, I want a rabbit, and it was all about, this rabbit, the Bonnie incident. And they're all doing that thing about, this is good coffee. And that whole scene was originally like about carrot juice, where it makes a lot more sense, the fact they're talking about it. And then the studios got kind of cold feet, and they went, I don't think we're ready to have a rabbit. And they said, you got to reshoot it. And he went, for God's sake. And he did, reshoot it with a human. And Constance Rabbit, goes back to the UK thinking, well, I had a chance at stardom and blew it. And it was really then me going on with that, asking myself, okay, why didn't she get that job? Why did they pull her from the final cut? What kind of an England did she return to? And where do we take this from here? So quite often, the way I think up ideas is I've got these little scenarios that sort of boil around in my head. And it's a logical progression of that, central scenario. And once you start thinking one thing and you go, well, maybe they have to live in colonies, maybe they're not amongst us, as they don't have freedom of movement within the UK. And where do we go with this? And then it starts to sort of snowball, and the ideas spread and darken, and the book sort of slowly sort of starts bubbling up. So it's very much sort of associative kind of fact imagining, I guess, and trying to put a logical framework to it all, so it kind of vaguely makes sense.
It's so interesting seeing the genesis of the idea. I love it. How long did it take you to come up with this? How long did this book take to write?
I think it was a couple of years. I started it when I was writing Early Riser, because I wanted a break, because Early Riser was a monster to write. I just, horrible, horribly blocked. Didn't like it at all. And I just took sort of a month off to write 20,000 words of this idea that I was having. And I really loved it. And as soon as I finished Early Riser, I just went straight back to Constant Rabbit. And I think it took me maybe 18 months to write after that. But the odd thing about these ideas is that once you kind of get the sort of the framework, it sort of oddly enough starts to write itself. The logic sort of slots into position. There are things that rabbits can do, there are things that rabbits can't do, and it sort of makes all sense. So after that, it was relatively easy to write, plus of which I had an ending, which has always helped, because then you got somewhere to head for.
So the ending came to you toward the beginning, like you thought of the ending at the beginning of the process?
Yeah, that like never happens to me. Like never happens to me. Is that I had this ending and I thought, that will work really, really well. And it's kind of unexpected, and no spoiler alerts, obviously. But yeah, as soon as I had that, then I had somewhere to go for, and I could foreshadow it. And it's foreshadowed several times throughout the book. And then we kind of realized that the book is then Peter, who is, the first person he's telling the narrative. It's kind of him looking back on things, and these things have happened, and they have an inevitability about them. And that made it a lot easier. But generally, no, I do not have an ending in sight. I think this is only the second time I've ever had an ending before I'd actually got there writing it.
I want to talk about what's behind you, and that's the picture of you in the Harvey the Harvey painting.
knew that. Oh, yeah, because people say, what is that? I don't know that. And you go, have you never seen Harvey? And they go, not really. And I go, why have you not seen Harvey? And of course, why should people have seen Harvey? You know, I mean, I've seen it because I'll be 60 next January. And it's very much part of my, growing up, like films like The Court Jester with Danny Kaye that nobody knows these days. But for me, it was like a big thing, when I was a kid. So if you haven't seen Harvey, this is the James Stewart version of Harvey. You must see Harvey. It's a delightful film, incredibly well written. James Stewart is brilliant, as he always is. I love James Stewart. And at one point, he's his character, and he's a bit, shall we say, a little bit strange. And he has a friend who is a 6 foot 4.5 inch tall rabbit that no one else can see apart from him, right? And everyone thinks it's just an imaginary rabbit. But at one point, sort of halfway through the film, he actually arrives with a painting, and he looks at it, and you can see he's looking at something, and then he turns around and shows it to camera, and he puts it on the mantelpiece. And it's a painting very like this one, with him and Harvey, his friend Harvey. And ever since I was small, and I remember seeing that film, I wanted a painting of me with Harvey. And as it turns out, my mother-in-law is an artist, and I asked her very kindly if she would do this for me, and I got some images from the film so that she could do it. And so that's me and Harvey.
Harvey is an obvious favorite of yours, because not only is there influences in this book, but it's also the first line of your first book, right? A face that could stop a clock.
Yeah, totally. I had my father had a face that could stop a clock. And I just pinched a line from Harvey as an opening line, but it means completely well, no, it doesn't mean completely different things. It means exactly the same thing. So James Stewart as Elwood P. Dowd tells this story about this, that Harvey has a face that can stop a clock, and he does stop clocks, and when it stops, you can walk around, you can do anything you want, and when you come back, no time has passed. So I use that motif and that trope, in my first book, describing Thursday Next, who's my protagonist in those books, her father. Yeah. So I do kind of borrow quite a lot from all these sort of classics that I love, and I think there is a kind of, it's not just me sort of with all my little references that I love. I think also there's a kind of imperative involved in keeping pop culture alive. And I don't mean all pop culture. I mean, there's lots of pop culture we could easily forget and would never be lost of anything. But I think other things like classic movies and classic performers should stay in the collective consciousness. And I think in Early Riser, I feature Carmen Miranda and her fruit hat. And this is just reinforcing that sense of the image, perhaps, in the world. It's just bringing it forward and referencing it. Because I think Carmen Miranda and a fruit hat is a pop culture sort of reference that I think we should keep. We shouldn't lose. In the same way as Harvey as this, huge rabbit, and Elwood P. Dowd, and Jimmy Stewart. He is a pop culture icon who should not be lost.
Well, you even in the book, your dueling scenes were inspired by Bob Hope in Never Say Die. I had to go back and look at the scene, which is hilarious. Yeah. This is, it was a scene in The Court Jester, but then that was actually taken from a Bob Hope movie that is completely lost to a pop culture reference. And I think it was important that I didn't just reference the film I was taking it from, but the original reference to that, in that, I did not write this, obviously. I purloined it for the purpose of my book, but it's me giving reference, I think, to the original people who performed it. The Court Jester is really a very funny film, and there are some sections in it which are immensely funny. And You Can Never Outfox the Fox is another reference that I take from that film and put in this book, which is very relevant. You can't outfox the fox, or can you? The Constant Rabbit, that's a one-off. There probably won't be any sequels to that one, right?
No. I mean, it's again, I can't really say too much because of a spoiler alert. I mean, if it were to go completely ballistic sales-wise, who knows? And someone said, we'll definitely want another book in that series. Then, I mean, I suppose I could. But as it stands at the moment, I think I've kind of said what I want to say in that particular world, in that particular set of circumstances, and I can't really imagine revisiting it, I have to say. So as it stands, no, it's a standalone.
There was the Thursday Next, when you wrote the Air Affair, was that supposed to be a standalone or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Read it now; it's completely a standalone. There's nothing about the book world in it. There's, it just finishes up. They get married happily ever after. End of. And when I was pitching it, or rather when my agent was pitching it to Fforde in the UK, they just asked me. I went up for a meeting, and they just asked me, is there a sequel? And of course, I thought, well, I better say yes. I'm not going to say no. I reject your publishing deals. And I said, oh yes, like this. Yes, of course there is. And they went, oh really? What's it called? And I went, thinking, on my feet. I kind of went, oh, it's called Lost in a Good Book. And they went, oh, well, that sounds like a good title. And what's it about? And then I just made something up about the book world and this policing agency, and it was like, oh, that's quite a good idea. And they went terrific, and they offered me a 2-book deal straight away. So no, it was just a standalone, in the same way that Last Dragon Slayer was a standalone. The Big Over Easy, that was a standalone, but I wrote a sequel to it as well because it just seemed fun to play with that world. All my books start off as standalone.
So you just never know. You never know what'll happen with the Constant Rabbit.
Never say never.
For now, Fforde fans could look forward to some upcoming series finales of his other books. Jasper's currently working on a final Dragon Slayer book, then a sequel to Shades of Grey, and a final 8th book to the beloved Thursday Next series.
It's going to be quite fun, getting to know her again, and she'll be, of course, a little bit older, as she always is in all the books. And yeah, I see her running a bookshop somewhere, or maybe being a librarian somewhere in retirement, and she gets sort of called in, perhaps one last, you've got to go back to the book world, all hell's breaking loose. Oh no, I'm done with that, so a bit of a sort of reluctant hero stuff. And it's going to be fun, but I'd like to round that series off as well, and just complete the series so they're all done, they're all finished, and then I can just go and carry on and do some other weird stuff that I'm kind of not even thinking about now.